What's happening, YouTube? It's great to see you again in the 1+ Den of M. So we are all going nuts about this. We just had our first episode of Loki drop on Wednesday, and it's been questions ever since. Now, we do have a few things to cover in this video, but there will be timestamps in the description box below to guide you if you do want to skip around. Now, my first theory has to do with the casting, which has always been one of my favorite parts when it comes to the MCU to begin with, trying to determine who's going to be playing who. Now, I must admit, I did Google this because I was certain while I was watching that episode that Sasha Lane was meant to show up in the show, and she is, but only for 2 episodes. Now, I personally think this is for a reason, and that reason is not that she's going to be playing the big bad in the show, who only shows up at the very end type of thing. I suspect that she's actually a pretty minor character in this particular story, but a character who's going to have a much larger role in the overall MCU. So there are 2 mystery actresses that have been cast, one being Sophia DiMartino and the other being Sasha Lane. Now, there's a ton of speculation that Sophia is going to be playing Lady Loki, which is probably true, given that her and Tom Hiddleston are doing press together. They were at a premiere event together. That doesn't usually happen when someone's playing the big bad opposite the main character, and they seem to have quite a connection off screen. So in my mind, she'll probably end up being Lady Loki, but I don't think she's necessarily the rogue variant that the TVA is looking for. So that brings us to Sasha Lane, who I actually think is going to be playing Enchantress, and that's for a couple of reasons. So I don't know if you all remember, before Ragnarok was released, there was a rumor that Cate Blanchett was actually going to be playing Enchantress and not Hela. Now, that obviously was not accurate, but her name did pop up a couple times in theories. Now, I think it would make sense to bring the character into the fold, so I'm all for it, but I don't think that it's going to be Amora, as she's known in the comic books, but in fact another version of the character known as Sylvie Lushton. Now, I've got 3 reasons for this. Sylvie Lushton in the comic books is a young girl with magical abilities that is being used by Loki, and he's actually responsible for giving her those powers. So it is possible that we'll see a future version of Loki return to the timeline with Sylvie to provide her with these powers. Now, she goes on to become a member of the Young Avengers, which we can currently see being built. And she could round out the team with an Asgardian, even though in the comics she isn't one. On top of that, part of Loki's plan was to breach the Young Avengers' magical defenses by having Sylvie infiltrate them, but she ends up being discovered and banned from the group by none other than Wiccan, who we met in WandaVision. Now, I went in and compared the ages of 3 actresses, and 2 of them, being Haley Steinfeld and Sasha Lane, are roughly the same age, and given that Sophia DiMartino has a few years on Sasha, I suspect the latter showing up as part of the Young Avengers versus the former. Now, point number 2 is Sylvie Lushton is from Brixton, which is a town in Oklahoma, where we saw the variant visit in the final scene of the first episode. But the variant showed up in 1858, which may have been too early. Bruce, am I too soon? It's Lois! Now, at the time being 1858, Salina, Oklahoma wasn't actually a thing, it was still indigenous land. In fact, the government at the time was deliberately putting indigenous people there until they hit a vein of oil in 1859. So although I suspect the variant may be miscalculated, it does look like they were still able to retrieve a time charge, which I will talk about a bit more later. Now, my final theory about this is not a call-out, I'm not trying to be mean, but one of the notable character traits of Sylvie Lushton is a noticeable lisp, which, again, I'm not trying to be mean, but Sasha Lane has. Now, given that they cast Tessa Thompson as Valkyrie and Idris Elba as Heimdall, we know that not all Asgardians are necessarily blonde-haired and blue-eyed. It's pretty simple. So I would have no trouble believing that a character who's typically portrayed as blonde-haired and blue-eyed is being played by none other than a brown-eyed queen with her dreadlock crown, Sasha Lane. Whether they're mashing the 2 characters and she is Asgardian, or they're staying true to the comics and she just thinks she's Asgardian, remains to be seen. But given her critically acclaimed performance in American Honey, I won't be at all surprised if we see Sasha Lane pop up in the future beyond this show. See what I did there, future? Because it's about time travel, huh? So I'm going to try and keep this video at 3 main points, and try not to go off on a tangent. But my second point is actually having to do with a scene in the trailer, combined with something that I noticed in the first episode. We know that Loki now knows that even after all of his hard work, Thanos is still going to kill him, or has killed him, I don't quite know at this point. But personally, if I saw somebody I was working for kill me in the future, I'd want to make sure that didn't happen. So Loki's realized that he's also responsible for the death of Frigga by leading the Dark Elves in her direction in Thor the Dark World. So it's likely that the character is going to seek out some sort of redemption arc or, try and combat his grief and likely try to get back to the main timeline or the sacred timeline. But is there another version of Loki running around? Probably, and it probably is Sophia DiMartino, but I don't think she's behind everything. And here's why. In the trailer, we see a scene that looks an awful lot like Vormir. We see a woman with short red hair sitting with her back turned, and we see the glow of purple and orange kind of in the background. Now, a lot of people suspected that this was Nat on Vormir, but when Nat died, her hair was in a half-blonde, half-red braid, not the bob that we saw her with in Avengers 1 and 2. Now, you'll notice that in that particular scene, if you go and watch the trailer, the background colors are very similar to the time charges that were detonated in episode 1. And it seems like the variant's actually collecting those. So my suspicion is that in order to save the sacred timeline, the variant must be stopped. But what if they're not? What if instead Loki and Lady Loki realize that the only way that both of them can survive is to, in fact, destroy the sacred timeline altogether using those charges, leading to complete and total chaos, a fracture that could lead into, another war for the timelines, perhaps secret wars, or even a multiverse of madness. Now, with that being said, although Lady Loki is a very obvious choice for the big bad of the show, who better to combat Loki than, Loki? It seems a little easy, almost too easy, borderline lazy. So we also see a demon in the stained glass window that is located in France, who a lot of people thought was none other than Mephisto. And it's since been confirmed that Mephisto is not in this series. Evidently, that scene was in the trailer that was released at D23 before WandaVision and all of that hype. Now, I did notice the demon has a blue tongue, which I think is super important because Loki is also known as Silver Tongue. However, you can't really make a silver stained glass window, or rather they wouldn't have been able to back at that time. So blue would have been a logical choice. Mobius mentions that that particular devil is afraid of them. So yes, I think it's another version of Loki, but as Mobius doesn't seem too concerned about them, I don't think that they're A, working alone, or B, acting of their own volition, leading me to suspect some sort of pact, perhaps blackmail, forced servitude, that sort of thing. Now, I truly think the big bad of this show is going to end up being a version of Nathaniel Richards known as Immortus, even though it's been confirmed that the Kang version of the character will appear in Ant-Man Quantumania. That leaves us with Ramatut and Iron Lad as other versions of the character who could still pop up from their respective timelines. Now, I totally get it. It's not really the easiest thing to wrap your head around, the same character from multiple timelines with different motives, so I don't think this is going to be like an immediate reveal, but rather a slow burn, leading up to the characters being connected and possibly even played by different actors to represent their different timelines that they're from. Now, a lot of people are suggesting that Kang is the villain, and took note of Rovanna Renslayer. Now, this character is noted as Judge Renslayer at the time of the first episode, and she's played by the glorious Gugu Mbatha-Raw, but the character herself in the comics is actually most well known as the consort, lover, or wife of Immortus, who, like I said, is Nathaniel Richards. But, as I mentioned earlier, a different timeline than Kang. Different motives than Kang. So, do I think Kang's going to show up himself? Not necessarily, but a future version of the character just might. Now, how does this all fit into the grand scheme of things in the future MCU installments, you might ask? Well, you've heard it, folks. Kevin Feige confirmed that this particular series is going to have a massive impact on the future of the MCU, leading me to believe that Loki is going to be responsible for the chaos in the Doctor Strange sequel, The Multiverse of Madness, by further disrupting the timeline instead of fixing it. Now, this means Loki could potentially end up responsible for giving Wanda access to her children in whatever dimension that they're currently in, as we saw in the WandaVision post-credit scene, and also possibly providing the rumored villain Shuma Gorath an opening between his dimension and America Chavez's, who we know is being played by Xochitl Gomez, and in turn giving her the opportunity to escape to our dimension while her mothers ultimately sacrifice themselves in their dimension to buy her time to escape. Now, if they're planning on sticking to the comic book characters' origins as they were written, then this is kind of likely. It doesn't seem too out there. So some of the other questions that I had throughout the episode was whether or not the TVA is located within Chronopolis, which remains to be seen, and also who the hell was voicing Miss Minutes. Well, I have an answer to one of those questions, and it is the incredibly talented Tara Strong. Now, for those of you who don't know, Tara Strong voiced some of, and I really should say most of, my favorite cartoon characters growing up. She's known for Teen Titans, Fairly Odd Parents, My Little Pony, the Powerpuff Girls. Like, seriously, she is in everything. So if you're not actually familiar with her, I'd really suggest Googling her, because if it's animated, she's probably in it. Anyways, folks, that's it for me. I am so excited for this next episode coming up in a couple days of Loki. I wish these shows were released all at once. So we could binge on them. I can't stand the anticipation. It's killing me. But at least we don't have that please stand by screen popping up when it's least welcome. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, and on your way there, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons for more videos. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you guys later.